For the first 20 seconds I wanted you to feel the heat, the hush, and the eyes. The wind had pushed sand into our boots, the sky had turned the color of rust, and every person at Redford's old auction yard had gone quiet for reasons they couldn't name. A chestnut wild horse stood in the ring, ropes on his halter, breath like smoke. He didn't look scared. He looked like he knew us. I stood at the fence and kept my hands flat on the rail so no one saw them shake. "Easy," Clay said from my left, pretending he spoke to me and not the horse. The auctioneer tried a joke that died before it reached the speakers. Someone's child asked, "Why is he staring?" And the mother hushed him as if a wrong word might break the air. The horse turned his head toward me, slow and steady, then held me there with his eyes. They were the same dark color I remembered from a photo I kept hidden in a drawer, my brother Sam beside a younger version of this same blaze. I told myself it was only a match of markings, nothing more, but the thought slipped. "No," I whispered, and then I said it anyway. "Sam?" Clay heard it and leaned in. "You all right?" "I'm fine," I said, though my voice came out dry. "Keep your hat down." The handler tugged the rope and the horse didn't fight. Instead, he took one step forward, lowered his head, and bent one front knee. The crowd gasped so cleanly it sounded like one breath. The auctioneer lowered his mic. "Did he just?" "He kneeled," someone said behind me. "Like a person." I told myself it was tiredness or training I didn't know about. But I had broken colts all my life and never saw that calm. The handler backed up, confused. The horse stayed down, eyes still on me as if he waited for a word I had not said in 32 years. "Don't," Clay warned when I moved toward the gate. "You don't owe anyone a show." "It's not a show," I said. "It's a question that stopped running." I stepped inside the ring without asking. Dust lifted around my boots. The horse shifted his weight but didn't rise. Up close I saw the thin scar along his cheek, right where Sam's horse had once caught barbed wire. I didn't reach for him. I only stood there, and the wind dropped so hard I heard my own breath. "Say it," Clay called softly. "I already did," I answered, and the horse blinked like he understood. Then he exhaled, warm and steady, and the rope went slack as if he had chosen to be here, like he had come back for something we had not yet found. The dust swirled as I stood inside that ring, the silence so sharp it cut through my chest. The horse did not move. He held his kneeling posture, steady, like a soldier remembering a vow. I wanted to step back to let the handlers take over, but something about those eyes pinned me. They were not wild eyes. They were waiting. Watching me like an old friend who had returned after a long road. "Get out of there, Amos," the auctioneer called, voice cracking. His words didn't carry strength, only nerves. The handlers tightened their grip on the ropes, but the horse didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted slightly like he meant to rise, but he stopped halfway as if the choice depended on me. Evelyn's voice came faint through the crowd. "It can't be," she whispered, though I heard it clear as thunder. She stepped forward, her hand pressed tight against her chest. Clay looked between us, uneasy. "You're seeing what I'm seeing, right?" he muttered. I swallowed hard. "I don't know what I'm seeing," I said, though inside I knew exactly what had shaken me. The horse rose slowly then, tall and proud, dust clinging to his coat. He shook once, powerful enough to make the ropes snap free from one handler's hands. The man cursed and stumbled back, but the horse didn't charge or rear. He just walked straight toward me. My boots sank into the dirt. I couldn't move even when he stopped inches away. His breath touched my face, warm, steady, carrying the dry scent of desert miles. I closed my eyes for a moment, and in that breath I thought I heard it. Sam's voice. Not words, not sound, just a memory so sharp it felt alive. When I opened my eyes, the horse leaned his head down, pressing his muzzle against my shoulder like we had known each other forever. The crowd behind the fence gasped, whispers running wild. "It's a ghost horse," someone said. "It knows him." I laid my hand gently on his neck. My fingers shook, but the horse didn't pull away. He lowered his head further, almost bowing, and the noise of the crowd faded like it had never been there. It was only me, the horse, and a silence that carried 32 years of questions. Clay broke the spell with a harsh whisper. "What do you think he wants?" I looked into the horse's eyes again and felt it clear as daylight. "He came back," I said. "But not for me alone. He came back for something we've all forgotten." That night the ranch did not rest. Even after the crowd had scattered and the auction yard emptied, the echo of what happened lingered in every corner. I sat on the porch, my elbows on my knees, the lantern light flickering across the boards. Out in the paddock, the horse stood calm, his shadow long under the moon as if he belonged there all along. Evelyn brought me coffee I didn't drink. She set it down, her hands trembling more than mine. "You think it's him, don't you?" she asked softly. I kept my eyes on the horse. I don't know what I think. You called his name, she reminded me. I didn't mean to. Her sigh carried years of silence between us. Some things don't slip out by mistake. Before I could answer, Clay walked up the steps, hat in hand, boots heavy against the wood. He didn't knock, just lowered himself onto the rail. His face was pale, his voice low. That horse ain't right. Not right how? I asked. Not in a bad way, he said, glancing at me. Just different. Like he knows things. Things a horse shouldn't. I didn't argue. My mind had already run in that same circle. From the dirt road, headlights cut across the yard. Sheriff Lonnie's truck rolled up slow, engine rumbling into silence. He climbed out, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He didn't greet us, didn't waste words. He only looked toward the paddock, jaw tight. You saw it too, I said. He nodded once. Been waiting 30 years for this day. What are you talking about? Clay pressed. Lonnie shifted his weight, looking older than he had that morning. When your brother went missing, Amos, we found things we never told you. Things no report would explain. A compass with his initials. Boot prints that ended in nothing. A circle in the sand like it had been burned into the earth. We locked it all away. Figured truth would break you more than lies. My chest burned. You lied to me for 32 years. He didn't defend himself. His voice cracked with the weight of it. We thought it was mercy. The horse let out a low, steady sound from the paddock. Not a whinny, not a snort. Something in between, almost like a voice carried through breath. Tyler, Miriam's boy, had slipped from his house and now stood by the fence, small hand stretched out. The horse leaned into him, calm as prayer. Evelyn gripped my arm. Amos, she whispered, he's not here by chance. He's here because he remembers. I stared at the horse, at the boy, at the sheriff who could no longer hide his fear. And in that moment, I knew the past hadn't vanished. It had found a way back to our door. The next morning, the sky carried a strange hush, as if even the roosters held their breath. I walked out with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold in my hand. The horse, Ryder, that's the name Clay had muttered the night before, stood at the far edge of the paddock, head high, ears twitching at sounds I could not hear. Evelyn came beside me without a word, slipping something from her sweater pocket. She held out an old photograph, edges curled and worn thin. It was Sam, 22 and smiling, one hand on the reins of his chestnut horse. The same blaze on the nose, the same scar by the cheek. My throat tightened as I compared the picture to the animal standing in front of us. That's him, she whispered. You know it as well as I do. I wanted to deny it, to call it a trick of markings, of memory, of longing stretched too far. But the longer I stared, the harder the words stuck in my throat. Clay came trudging up the yard, a satchel slung over his shoulder. He placed it on the porch with a weight that spoke of secrets. Found this cleaning my barn, he said. Didn't think it mattered before. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside lay a journal, the cover cracked, pages yellowed. Sam's handwriting rushed across the paper, loopy and young. The first entries spoke of chores, rides, jokes half finished. But the last one made my chest cave in. If I don't come back, it means I found it, or it found me. Evelyn's breath caught. Clay's eyes darted to me. What did he mean? He asked. I shook my head, but the words blurred together as if the page itself trembled. He knew something we didn't. He went out looking for it and maybe it found him first. From the road, Lonnie's cruiser appeared again, dust trailing behind. He stepped out holding a file I had never seen. Without asking, he dropped it onto the porch beside the journal. Redford Case, 1993, the label read. You said there was nothing left to find, I told him. He didn't meet my eyes. I said what I had to. Inside the folder was a photo of a saddlebag burned with Sam's initials. And another, stranger still, hoof prints in a perfect circle, no tracks leading in or out. The wind rose then, carrying a sound that wasn't quite a name but close enough to chill every bone I had left. The horse lifted his head sharply, ears pointed west, as if the land itself had just whispered a direction we had long forgotten. By noon that day the decision pressed on me heavier than the sun. Clay waited by the truck, the journal clutched like a map he didn't know how to read. I climbed into the driver's seat, every bone in me fighting between dread and need. Ryder stood near the fence, calm as stone, but when I started the engine he stepped forward and pawed the ground once, like he meant to say he was coming too. The road to Hollow Ridge hadn't been used in years. Weeds split through the ruts, buzzards circling above like they had been waiting. Clay rode quiet beside me, thumbing the worn edge of Sam's journal. Finally he muttered, You really think he's out there still? I don't know what I think, I answered. but I know Ryder does. We reached the canyon's edge by late afternoon. The cliffs stretched red and endless, the air still enough to feel like the land was holding its breath. I stepped out, my boots crunching brittle weeds. "This is where he was last seen," Clay said flatly. I nodded. The place hadn't changed, as though time had skipped it. The journal had a page folded at the corner. Sam's words leapt at me, "The horses go here to die, or to come back." Before I could speak, a sound of hooves echoed across the ridge. Ryder appeared without a sound of rope or spur, moving sure and steady, like he had traced this trail before. He stopped in front of us, eyes fixed west. "You see that?" Clay whispered. I swallowed hard. "He wants us to follow." We trailed behind him, ducking low branches, dust clinging to our clothes. The further we walked, the quieter the world became. Even insects hushed. Then the land opened suddenly into a clearing none of us had ever marked on a map. At its center stood a lone tree, twisted and ancient, roots clutching the soil like secrets. Ryder walked to it and lowered his head. Clay crouched, brushing at the ground. His hand uncovered cracked leather. A saddle strap burned with the initials SR. My knees buckled. "He made it this far," I whispered. Clay looked up, face pale. "Maybe he stayed." The word struck me harder than truth or lie. Because for the first time, it wasn't about whether Sam had lived or died. It was about whether something out here had claimed him, something the desert never let go. The air thickened, the wind circling us like a breath from underground. Ryder lifted his head sharply, ears twitching, eyes set on shadows we could not see. And in that heavy stillness I felt it, Sam wasn't gone. Not yet. Evelyn waited on the porch when we returned, her eyes searching my face before they shifted to the saddle strap in my hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her trembling fingers brushed over the burned initials, and her breath came out as a prayer half-spoken. Sheriff Lonnie arrived not long after, a cloth-wrapped bundle under his arm. He set it on the table and unwrapped it slow, as if the truth itself might lash out. Inside lay a compass, scratched and weather-worn, with S.R. carved deep on the back. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. "He carried that everywhere," she whispered. Lonnie kept his eyes low. "We found it out past Hollow Ridge. We thought showing it would only break you more." "You thought wrong," I said, my voice cutting sharper than I meant. "You kept my brother buried in silence." Lonnie didn't argue. He only said, "You weren't ready." Before I could answer, Tyler slipped in through the barn door, his face pale but his eyes lit with something fierce. "He's gone," he panted. "Gone?" I snapped. "Ryder." He broke from the paddock. I followed him. "He's heading west, toward the ridge." I didn't think. My body moved faster than my breath. Clay grabbed his hat and we ran for the trail. Tyler was right. Even barefoot, he had kept up with Ryder, his small figure darting through brush, following the horse as if the desert itself had cleared a path for him. When we reached the ridge again, Ryder had stopped, his hooves scraping the dry ground. He dug until the dust gave way, revealing a rusted horseshoe, still warm though the air was cool. I knelt and touched it with my bare hand. "This was his," I whispered, my voice breaking. The wind rose then, fierce and sudden, carrying a single sound. A name. So. Clay staggered back, his face pale. Tyler froze, his eyes wide with awe, his chest rising quick. "You heard that, didn't you?" he gasped. I couldn't answer. My throat locked, my heart pounding as if the earth itself had called out my brother's name. Ryder lifted his head and stepped toward the far slope. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back. His steady gait told us one thing: he remembered the way. And as I followed, every step pressed the same thought deeper. Sam had never truly left. The desert had kept him, and now it wanted to show us why. The trail narrowed as Ryder guided us deeper through the brush. Branches clawed at our sleeves, the air cooler now, heavy in a way that pressed against the skin. Tyler stayed close, his small hands clutching Sam's journal like it was a lantern. Clay muttered under his breath, though whether it was prayer or curse I couldn't tell. At last the path opened into a clearing I had never seen before. The walls of red stone curved around us like a circle carved by time. At its center stood a lone tree, twisted, ancient, its roots thick and dark against the soil. Ryder stopped beneath it and lowered his head as if bowing. Clay knelt and brushed the dirt with his palm. The soil was disturbed, darker than the rest. He looked up at me, his voice rough. He was here. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands digging until the dirt gave way. A piece of cracked leather surfaced, initials burned clear as day, SR. My chest locked tight, and I pressed the strap to my forehead, eyes stinging with tears I hadn't let fall in years. Maybe he didn't die here, Clay whispered. Maybe he stayed. The thought hit me harder than the discovery itself. What if Sam hadn't vanished by accident? What if he chose this place, or worse, what if the place chose him? Before I could answer, Ryder let out a low sound, softer than a whinny, deeper than a sigh. He turned toward the shadows, ears pricked. From the far side of the clearing, a shape moved. An old horse stepped forward, coat sun-bleached, bones sharp under skin, eyes clouded with age yet calm as if they had seen more than years could measure. Clay stiffened. "I know that horse," he muttered. "That's the one Sam rode the day he disappeared." My breath caught. 32 years should have taken him long ago, yet here he was, breathing, watching us with quiet weight. Tyler stepped forward, fearless in a way only children can be. He reached out, brushing his hand along the old horse's neck. "He's not just a horse either," the boy whispered. "There's something still in him." Ryder moved beside the old horse, the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder like guardians of the clearing. At the base of the tree, half hidden in the roots, I saw a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. My hands shook as I pulled it free. Inside was a second journal. The name on the first page stopped my breath. Samuel Redford. And in that moment, with Ryder's eyes fixed on mine, I knew my brother hadn't left us at all. The desert had kept him, written his story into the soul of the horses, waiting for us to read what he could never say. The leather of the second journal cracked under my fingers as I opened it, the pages worn but filled with Sam's hand, rushed, crooked, alive. The entries spilled across the paper, stories of long rides and nights under the stars, but one passage froze me cold. I stayed because the land would not let me leave. I became part of it, and now it remembers me through the eyes of the horse. Clay read over my shoulder, his lips parting without sound. "You're saying he changed?" I shook my head, voice rough. "No. The desert changed him." A sudden gust swept the clearing, rattling the tree, lifting dust into a spiral. The old horse let out a mournful sound, then turned and limped back into the brush, fading as silently as he had appeared. Ryder didn't follow. He only watched, ears twitching, eyes fixed on me as though asking if I finally understood. Behind me, Tyler hugged the journal tight against his chest, his young voice unsteady. "Mr. Redford, he's not gone. He's in Ryder. I can feel it." The boy's certainty made my skin prickle. He spoke the truth I had been too afraid to say aloud. When we returned to the ranch that evening, no one slept. Evelyn sat at the table, the two journals open before her, her eyes scanning the words with tears she didn't hide. "He wasn't trapped," she whispered. "He stayed by choice. Something called him." I closed the journal slowly, my hand trembling. And now Ryder carries him, not just memory, something deeper. The lantern light flickered against Ryder's form outside the barn. Tyler leaned against his shoulder, whispering lines from Sam's entries, and the horse's ears twitched at every word as if listening. At dawn, Lonnie pulled up again, his face set hard, carrying a bundle wrapped in leather. He placed it on the table without a word. Inside was the original report he had hidden all these years. His voice cracked. "We found more than a compass. Boot prints. Circles burned into the sand. No trail in or out." I lied because I didn't know how to explain it. From the doorway, Rufus McDowell appeared, leaning heavy on his cane, eyes locked on Ryder. His voice rasped like the desert itself. "The land doesn't forget. You leave a part of yourself out there, it finds a way to send it back." He stepped closer to Ryder, staring deep into his eyes. "Welcome back, Sam," he whispered. No one corrected him. I laid my hand on Ryder's mane, my throat burning with words I could not shape. "At last I managed. You waited long enough. We are not letting you go this time." Outside, the wind shifted, brushing the grass like a sigh, and for the first time in decades, the ranch felt less haunted, almost alive again. The morning sun rose soft across Redford Ranch, laying gold over the paddocks like a blessing. Ryder stood in the open field, his coat shining, every breath calm. I carried Samuel's old saddle in my arms, the leather cleaned and mended through a long night of work. Each stitch had been a memory, each buckle a prayer. Evelyn watched from the porch, her hands folded tight. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. I nodded, though my chest trembled. "I need to ride him once. Not to prove anything. Just to finish what was left undone." Clay tightened the straps, his silence heavy with respect. Ryder didn't resist. In fact, he lowered his head, almost as if he knew this was the moment we had both been waiting for. When I mounted, the movement was smooth, steady, too familiar for a horse I had never ridden. My heart thudded against my ribs. Tyler leaned on the fence, clutching both journals, eyes wide with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. I looked at him, my voice low. Keep them safe. They belong to all of us now. He nodded, as if he already understood more than words could carry. We rode slow, the land unfolding beneath us with a stillness I hadn't felt in decades. Each step Ryder took seemed guided not by my hands but by memory, Sam's memory. His body shifted with a rhythm I knew from long ago, and for a moment it felt like my brother's hand rested over mine. At the clearing, I dismounted and walked to the tree. My hand pressed against its bark, rough and ancient, while the compass weighed heavy in my pocket. My voice cracked as I whispered, "You can rest now, Sam. You don't have to carry this anymore." I buried the compass in the soil at the tree's roots, covering it with trembling hands. Ryder stepped beside me, lowering his head until his forehead touched mine. The air carried a warmth I hadn't felt since my brother vanished, and my tears fell without shame. "Thank you," I whispered, "for finding your way home." When we rode back, the ranch came into view through the soft morning light. Evelyn stood by the gate, her eyes full of tears, her hands pressed to her heart. Clay tipped his hat. The silence that once haunted this land was gone, folded into peace. For the first time since Sam disappeared, I felt whole again, not because the past had vanished but because it had come home. Ryder wasn't just a horse. He was proof that memory, love, and spirit never truly die. Weeks later, flowers bloomed in fields that had been dry for years, and birds filled the air with song. Life had returned. The moral was simple yet heavy with truth. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it waits for us, not to haunt but to heal. And if we have the courage to face it, we find that love never leaves. It only changes shape, waiting to be remembered. Days turned into weeks and something shifted across the land. The silence that had once weighed heavy over the ranch seemed to lift. Birds returned to the trees along Hollow Ridge, and wildflowers began pushing through soil that had been dry for decades. It was as though the desert itself had drawn a deep breath and finally exhaled. I spent my mornings in the barn brushing Ryder, each stroke calm and slow. He no longer carried the restless edge he had when we first saw him. His movements were deliberate now, almost thoughtful. Sometimes when I spoke aloud, I swore he listened the way Sam used to, quiet, steady, like he was letting me know he heard without needing to answer. Evelyn kept both journals in a wooden box by the fireplace, beside an old photograph of Sam. Visitors came often. Neighbors, friends, even strangers who had heard the story of the wild horse who came back. They sat at our table, drank sweet tea, and left with a silence in their eyes, the kind people carry when they've brushed against something they can't explain. Tyler spent nearly every day at the ranch after that. The way he connected with Ryder was beyond words. He read to him from the journals, and the horse's ears twitched at every page turned. Once Tyler asked me quietly, "Do you think he'll ever forget?" I smiled, though my eyes stung. "No, son. Some things don't fade. Not if you treat them right." Clay in his own way made peace too. He finally returned to the ridge, not to mourn but to whisper thanks. Sheriff Lonnie, near retirement, brought me the original case file he had kept hidden. Without hesitation I burned it in the fire. "He was never lost," I said, watching the paper curl to ash. "Just waiting to be remembered." One evening as the sun dipped low, Ryder stood at the edge of the pasture facing west. I walked out to join him, saying nothing. We stood together, the light turning the fields gold, the air soft and forgiving. For the first time in my life I felt no need to search anymore. I placed my hand on his mane and whispered, "You found your way home." And so did I. The wind rose gently, brushing the tall grass like a blessing. The past had not come back to wound us. It had come back to heal. And in that truth lay the lesson. Love does not vanish and memory does not die. When we honor them, they return, not as ghosts to haunt us but as voices to guide us home. Seasons turned, and the ranch carried a new rhythm. Mornings no longer felt heavy. Instead, they carried the soft clatter of buckets, the creak of the barn door, and Ryder's steady breath. Life had settled into a quiet kind of peace. I found myself talking to him more often, not like to a horse, but like to someone who already knew the answers. Sometimes in the middle of brushing his coat, I caught myself saying, "You remember that day, don't you?" And he would tilt his head, calm and patient, like he did. Evelyn tended the journals as if they were sacred. She'd sit by the fire at night, turning the pages slowly, reading passages to herself until her lips trembled. One evening she closed the book and told me, "He didn't just vanish, Amos. He stayed to remind us that love doesn't stop when a body is gone. It carries on in ways we don't understand." I couldn't argue, not anymore. Tyler became part of the ranch. His hands learned the weight of reins, the rhythm of hooves, and the trust of a creature that held more history than any of us could measure. Watching him with Ryder was like seeing two worlds meet, the past stitched into the future, carried by a boy who still believed in wonder. Clay softened too. I'd find him sitting under the oak by the fence, his voice low, telling stories to Ryder as if Sam might be listening through him. Lonnie, after years of carrying secrets, finally let them go. He drove out one morning, left his badge on my porch and said, "Some truths are heavier than a badge can carry." His eyes were tired, but lighter than I'd ever seen. The land itself seemed to change with us. Hollow Ridge grew green in patches, wildflowers blooming where nothing had lived in decades. Neighbors said it was just weather. I knew better. The desert had carried my brother's story, and when Ryder walked back into my life, it let that story breathe again. One late afternoon, Ryder stood at the edge of the west pasture, watching the horizon. I walked up beside him, silent, letting the air settle between us. The sky burned gold, the wind gentle. I placed my hand on his neck, my voice barely more than breath. "You came back not to haunt us, but to heal us. And you did." That was the truth, the lesson the desert had carved deep into me. The past is never gone. It waits for us, not to chain us down, but to remind us who we are, and that love, in any form it takes, never leaves. It only changes shape until we are ready to see it again. The years that followed gave the Redford Ranch a new face. What once felt like a place of ghosts turned into a place of gathering. Neighbors came not to whisper about loss, but to share meals, laughter, and the story of a horse who carried more than flesh and bone. Children leaned on the paddock fence, wide-eyed, as Ryder walked past with a calm grace that made even grown men quiet. I often caught myself sitting on the porch at dusk, the journals on my lap, the fireflies blinking in the field. Each entry of Sam's handwriting no longer broke me. Instead, they steadied me. His words were not about death. They were about becoming part of something larger, something that could not be buried. Evelyn once told me, "We thought grief was the end of love." But it wasn't. It was the beginning of learning to see love in another form. Her words stayed with me every time Ryder pressed his head against my shoulder, his breath slow and warm, carrying the weight of years I thought were lost. Tyler grew taller, his bond with Ryder only deepening. He rode him gently, never forcing, always listening. He had inherited something I had only begun to understand, an ability to hear without words, to trust without proof. Watching him, I realized the story was no longer mine to hold. It was passing on, stitched into the heart of a boy who would carry it forward. Clay and Lonnie found their peace in small ways. Clay planted wildflowers by the ridge, saying they belonged there now. Lonnie came less often, but when he did, he no longer carried the look of a man guarding secrets. He sat, drank coffee, and left lighter than he arrived. One evening, as the sun fell behind the ridge, Ryder stood tall at the western fence. I walked out and stood beside him. No words passed between us. None were needed. The silence was no longer hollow. It was whole. That night, I wrote a line in my own journal for the first time in years. Some stories are not meant to end. They wait for us to learn what love looks like when it refuses to die. And that was the lesson, the moral that lived in every breath Ryder took. Love is not bound by time or loss. It waits. It changes shape. And when it returns, it does not ask to be explained. It asks only to be remembered.